All right, so the second half of the animal kingdom, we're going to be looking at the phylum Chordata, the chordates. And so these animals on the right-hand side of this picture here, the cat and the penguin and the seagull and the platypus, these are all chordates. And so there are four characteristics that all chordates have. Some you would find in the embryonic form, some you would find in the adult. And so I want to just run through and make sure that you understand what these are. The first one is the notochord, which is a supportive rod. And so this picture on the side here is just kind of a generalized embryo of a chordate. So the notochord is supportive. In organisms that are vertebrates, that is what goes to become the vertebral column. And remember, the vertebral column is bony and it protects the spinal cord. Okay? The second thing is the hollow dorsal nerve cord, which is this blue part here, and you can see that it's coming from the brain, so it's an extension, okay? And in vertebrates, this was what will become the spinal cord. And so we have the vertebral column and the spinal cord. The pharyngeal pouches are up here, and it depends on what kind of organism you're looking at, what those will go to become. But in vertebrates, depend if you're a fish, those are going to go to become gills. If you're a mammal, those would go to become the bones in the middle ear. So they go to become different things in different organisms. And then the post-anal tail here. So we are chordates, but we don't have a tail. But if you look at pictures of embryos and fetuses of humans, you can see that at the beginning of our development, we did have a tail, okay? So all of those would be found either in the adult or in the embryonic form of a chordate. So I took this from one of the books, this table, and this is not that I want you to memorize the number of existing species or anything like that, but it's just a nice put everything together where you have the different groups that we're going to look at and an example from each group. So that might be kind of a follow-up when you're studying, kind of look at that and make sure that you have an idea of the different groups that we're going to be looking at for the chordates. Okay, so this might be news to you, but there is one group within this phylum that are invertebrates, meaning that they have all of the four characteristics that you would find in a chordate, but in the adult form, the notochord does not become a vertebral column. Okay, so because of that, they are called invertebrates. And so two examples that we have here, these are lancelets. So they look kind of like fish. They're tiny. If I was passing around examples in class, they're about maybe 1.5 inches or 2 inches long, and they kind of live burrowed down in the sand in oceans, okay? And then the other example is a tunicate. That's its scientific name, and sea squirt is the common name. And of course, if you look at that, it doesn't look anything like you might expect a chordate to look like, but it has all of those characteristics that we looked at in its embryonic form. In the adult form, it kind of looks like a sponge or something like that. So not that you have to be able to label a diagram, but this is the lancelet, and you can see at in the adult form, it has all of those things. So it has the pharyngeal gill slits or pouches. I think one of the books calls these pharyngeal pouches, and I think that's what I put in your notes. It has the tail, it has the dorsal nerve cord and the notochord, and so it's going to be considered a chordate, but it doesn't have a vertebral column, so it's an invertebrate chordate. And then this one is an example or some photographs of an actual tunicate. So they live in the ocean. They are attached to the bottom, kind of like the sponges. And so they're a very different looking example of a chordate. I would like you to know that they're an invertebrate chordate, but you don't have to know about all the parts or anything like that. Okay, so the rest of the chordates are going to be vertebrates. Okay, so they're all going to have a vertebral column, and so we are going to call these the vertebrate chordates. Okay, and I put a list of a couple of things that you would find in all of these organisms. So they all have an endoskeleton, meaning a skeleton on the inside of the body. Okay, they all have closed circulation, so all their blood is enclosed within the heart or in vessels. They all have paired appendages, whether it's arms and legs or fins or whatever. Advanced cephalization, remember cephalo refers to the head, so these organisms will have bigger and bigger brains and more sensory structures and all of that kind of thing. And then all of the other body systems, which we're going to look at specifically in humans when we finish looking at animals, are much more efficient. So they have a more efficient digestive system, respiration, depending on if they live in the water or on land. We'll talk a little bit about that. Excretion is getting rid of waste that's in the blood, and all of them will have separate sexes. You do see some, nope, all of them have separate sexes. So I'm giving you classes, and I'm hoping that these aren't all new words to you. I think you probably recognize mammal and reptile and amphibian and maybe aves. These are the birds. Some of the books refer to this first group as the craniates. I'm going to keep it here because that's the more common term. And then, I don't know if you recognize this word root here. Ichthyes means fish. And so we have those that have cartilage and those that have bone. So those classes I would like you to be able to recognize. And basically, we're going to look at each class, look at some examples of the class, and then one or two characteristics of each class. So we're going to start with the class Agnathans. And what you should remember about these guys is that they are jawless. Okay, so they're considered maybe part of the fish family. They live in the ocean, but they do not have a jaw. They don't have scales, which you might expect if it was fish-like. And we have two examples, one that's a scavenger and one that's not a scavenger. Okay, so this first example is a scavenger, meaning that he's on the bottom and he's eating up dead things, decomposing things. That's basically how he gets his energy. The characteristic that most people remember about the hagfish is that they have a pretty prolific slime gland. So I'm not going to pull up these videos right now, but I would suggest that you take a look at them. It's really, the slime gland basically is defense for this organism. So they don't swim really fast, they don't have good eyes or anything like that, but if they get touched or try to be picked up or anything like that, they start producing so much slime that they just become really slippery and you can't hold on to them, and that's basically their defense. So they're kind of an interesting organism. The other organism in this group is the lamprey. And the lamprey can be free living, meaning that it's just, swimming around in the water. But many of them are parasitic, meaning that they're living off of another organism. Okay, so you can see the mouth here. It doesn't have a jaw, but it does have teeth all the way around, and the whole thing is kind of like a sucker. So the way they're parasites, you can see this sea bass here. It has several lampreys hanging off of it, so they are attached to it. They're sucking nutrition from this organism. And so that's a problem, especially in the Great Lakes. They're finding that this is a problem. And So, they're trying to figure out a way to get rid of some of these because they're basically affecting the fish population in the Great Lakes. And this is another one that we have an example of this, a preserved example of a lamprey at school, which I usually pass around so you can see what they look like. So, but I do have those videos for you to look at for the hagfish. And so a couple of pictures here. This is to show the mouth with no jaw. This is a little bit, that's just a little bit of the amount of slime that a hagfish would produce if you touched it. And then here you can see these are hagfishes, and basically a big whale or something dies and falls to the bottom of the ocean. You're going to have all of these scavengers all over it because that's where they get their nutrition from. So the next step up from the jawless fish, the agnathans, are the rest of the fish classes. And so these are both named for fish. So ichthyes means fish. So the chondrichthyes and the osteichthyes are both in this group. And when we talk about circulation, they have a heart, they have vessels. Their heart is two-chambered, meaning that it's not super efficient. Our heart is four-chambered, much more efficient, okay? They're what we call cold-blooded. The scientific term for that is ectothermic, which means that they do not produce heat by their metabolism to maintain a particular temperature. They are dependent on the environment. And so they either are up at the top where it's sunny if they need to raise their temperature a little bit, or down at the bottom if they need to lower their temperature a little bit. Okay, so everybody in this group is going to have jaws. They're going to have gills for respiration, and they're going to have fins. So we didn't see all of those characteristics in the jawless fish. So chondrichthyes. Chondro means cartilage, okay? So cartilaginous fish, they have the endoskeleton, but it's made out of cartilage. It never becomes bony, okay? These have very highly developed jaws. So if you've seen any movies about sharks or watched shows about sharks, the jaw is a big thing. They have lots of teeth in those jaws, and those teeth basically are kind of on a system where when a tooth falls out, a new one comes in behind it. So this guy here is one of the great hammerheads. And this one here is a whale shark, which it has a big jaw, but not big teeth. And so it's actually a filter feeder. So not all sharks have, big teeth and are predators. So in this group, sharks is the one that you're probably familiar with, but we also have skates and rays. So I'm going to show you some pictures of those so you know what they are. So very similar in terms of how they're put together, but usually the skate has a little bit of a rounder nose than the ray does. And the rays many times will have a spine back here for defense. I don't know, I'm trying to think how long ago it was since Steve Irwin died, the crocodile hunter, but he died, he was collecting a ray that they were going to use on the show, and he was trying to calm it down, so he's holding it against his chest, but he had it against his chest with the spine side towards his body, and the ray got scared and put up the spine, which went through his heart. So that it wasn't trying to kill him, but it was defending itself basically. Okay, you can see that they have the skates have a little bit more loby fins too, but both of them have decent sized jaws and teeth. And they have a cartilaginous skeleton. So a couple pictures from one of the books. This is a ray at the top here, and maybe you've heard the term manta ray, and then a shark at the bottom.